Hello and welcome to the brewery. Today I've just finished a brew day making a fairly simple brew 1 and mosaic NEPA, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is off flavours in beer and how you can make a kit so that you can sample what these flavours are like without having to spend a lot of money. A few years back I did a talk on this at BrewCon in Leeds. What I'm going to do today is based off what I did then, but with a few tweaks and changes to bring it a bit up to date. So I hope you find this interesting and let's get going. So first of all, why would you want to make yourself a kit to allow you to make some okay beer taste awful? Well, the main aim here is to be able to identify what has gone wrong in your own and other people's beer. If you know what you're tasting, if you know what the off flavours are and what causes them, then you can identify them and, well, make better beer by correcting the problems. So hopefully this will be useful in helping you identify the off flavours in your and other people's beer. So the first way of getting to try off flavours and what they actually taste like or smell like is to buy a kit. You can buy samples which contain the actual off flavour chemicals, which you can then dose into a fairly bland beer and try it. Usually these kits are suitable for maybe 8 to 10 people, but they are quite expensive, possibly around 100 quid for a kit with maybe 10 off flavours in it. So it adds up even for a group of people. If you're doing a BJCP training course, you'll get a discount on one of these kits, which makes it much more worthwhile. So, if you don't want to go to the expense of a kit, how do we go about faking the off flavours? Well, there's basically 3 simple ways of doing it. Firstly, you just do the bad thing. If there's something that can make a beer taste wrong, introducing off flavour, just do that. Nice and easy. Secondly, you can, if you understand what the chemical is that is creating the off flavour, in some circumstances you can just get that chemical and dose a small amount of it into beer. A few of these are actually quite commonly available. And finally, you can just try and make the flavour directly. We know what the descriptions are, we can add something that tastes like that. So, to start with, let's go with actually doing the bad thing. So, the first off flavour we're going to try and fake is, well, not fake, actually make happen, is light struck. Often described as skunky. I don't often go around sniffing skunks, they're not really common in the UK, so not a description I'm very familiar with. So how do we go about faking this? Well, first we pick a reasonably hoppy beer, say, that we have. I would suggest in most cases you use a home brew for this. When I did the first version of this at BrewCon, I used a commercial beer, and a lot of those have been stabilised, so the effect was quite minimal. So in this case, I have a Belgian blonde beer. Now, this Belgian blonde came out of a homebrew competition that my club took part in recently. Apologies to whoever made this beer, which I have a leftover bottle of, for purposefully ruining it. So what do you do to make it light struck? Well, I took another spare bottle of this and I put some of it into a clear glass bottle. Exactly what you're told not to do. I then stuck this clear glass bottle on the windowsill for 2 days. So hopefully this is going to be distinctly light struck. When tasting these, it's usually worth tasting the base beer alongside the one you have purposefully ruined, just so you can detect the differences. So in this case, I'm going to pour a little of the Belgian blonde. Obviously this fresh bottle is carbonated, whereas the one I have messed with won't be. And a sample of the ruined beer. So to start with, what's the base beer like? Yeah, it's got a distinct low to moderate clovey Belgian notes, clovey peppery, there's some caramel. Yeah, it smells like a decent Belgian blonde. Moderate bitterness, some almost candy floss like sweetness. Yeah, that's nice. Now, for the bad bit. there is immediately a distinct difference in aroma of something quite unpleasant, almost eggy, distinct note of sulphur, and something really quite unpleasant. I think I now have a much better understanding of why you don't go around sniffing skunks all the time. It's less evident in the flavour, but it's lost a lot of the character, and it is still there in the aftertaste. Yep, that one's definitely worked. Now the next off flavour we're going for is oxidised, often described as cardboard, damp paper, and in more positive ones, sherry, port, and other fortified wines. So how do we do this one? Well, once again, we actually do the bad thing. In this case, I took the rest of the bottle of the Belgian Blonde, I took my oxygenation wand, and I tried to bubble some oxygen through it. Unfortunately, doing this caused the beer to go everywhere. It foamed up all over the shop, fairly predictably. So after getting a little bit of oxygen that way, I went for something a little bit more crude. I cable tied a bit of blue stuff, what's it called, blue roll, over the top, just to keep the flies out, and then just left it sat here on the bench once again for a couple of days. So I still have a sample of the base beer here, so let's see what the oxidised version comes out with. Now oxidation is supposed to affect different styles of beer differently, with darker beers having less impact, having some antioxidant properties. But this is pale, let's see what's happened. There's definitely the start of some oxidation happening there. We're getting some of the cardboard, a little bit of paperiness, but it is still quite at a low to moderate level, so it's enough to be detectable, but not a huge impact. Perhaps I should leave it open for more time and see what happens. The off flavour is much more present in the flavour than in the aroma, with distinct notes of cardboard and getting towards being quite unpleasant. Well, that one works. Maybe more time is needed for next time we try that one, but definitely worth a go. Right, and now onto a few where we can actually add the chemical itself. For these, you need to pick a fairly boring base beer, something without an awful lot of exciting flavour. I'd probably go for something fairly cheap and commercial. In this case, I have a can of Peroni, mostly because I'm going to end up with some left over, and it isn't a terrible beer, therefore I'll probably end up drinking it. So let's get some of this into a couple of glasses, one as a tasting sample to compare the flavour against, and one to muck around with. So let's start with some obvious stuff you're likely to have around the house. If we look at acetic off flavours, often caused by, well, acetic acid bacteria getting into your beer, acetic acid is commonly available in your house, assuming you like chips. So malt vinegar is basically acetic acid. So what we're going to do is add small amounts of acetic acid using a syringe. In this case, this is a 2 ml syringe. I'm probably going to add about 1 milliliter at a time, probably less, actually probably half a ml at a time for this one, till you can detect the flavour. You don't have to use these syringes. I also have little pipette type things that you can buy boxes of hundreds of them for a few quid off the internet. Once again, useful brewing thing to have. So let's get started with ruining some Peroni. Okay, so I have the base beer and the adulterated beer. In this case, just tasting it as I added it to reach detectability, about 1 ml in what's probably about a 100 ml sample. That's just under 100 ml, about 75 ml, because that's 100 ml. Sample is just about detectable. So the base beer, yep, it's a fairly bland Italian lager. The aroma here, the acetic acid immediately jumps out at you. It's much more detectable in the aroma than it is in the flavour. The alternative here, though malt vinegar has a little bit of flavour and aroma of its own, is you could use distilled vinegar instead. Yeah, and you get a distinct acidity now with a almost fruity addition to it. When I added the parfum in, it actually made the beer taste more interesting, which is something I've found a few times. Adding some off flavours can make your beer nicer, especially when it's a very boring beer. And so, on to our next off flavour. This time one you're more likely to have around the brewery than around the house, and that's lactic acid. I often have this, I usually have this at the brewery to do mash pH adjustments. It's one of these useful things to have around. This is 80% lactic acid, just so you get the numbers right when you do your version. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse out the glass from the last sample, pour a little bit more boring beer, and we'll put in some lactic acid. So in this case I put half a ml of lactic acid into what was originally probably about 50 ml of beer. Sampling that, it was aggressively lactic, so I've doubled up the size of the sample to back to about 100 ml again, just to weaken the effect down. But in the aroma, there's a light lemony sourness appearing. It's at a low level at this concentration, and a touch of yogurtiness as well. In the flavour, the lemony tartness is much more present, along with like sour milk almost. Once again heading towards yoghurt. With this one, I think it is very dependent on the strength of lactic acid you have. This is 80%. Some other ones are lower, so adjust your sample size to what you have. And the final thing we have where you add the actual ingredient is one that you're unlikely to have lying around the house unless you are an enthusiastic baker, and that is natural butter flavouring. Now, natural butter flavouring is almost always actually made from diacetyl. It does contain a few other base ingredients, but those are mostly to make it actually into a liquid. The natural flavouring is almost always diacetyl. So let's give this one a go. So in this case I've added half a ml of fake butter flavouring into about 100 ml of the base beer. There is a distinct butterscotch come buttery aroma, very much in the butterscotch type area, which carries through into the flavour. There's a slight caramel sweetness added to the base beer. I'm going to sample the base beer. Yeah, none of that flavour is there in the base beer. And a slight slickness to the sides of the mouth as you taste it. So now we move on to the flavours, the off flavours, where we're actually just trying to mimic the description of the flavour. To start with, we're going to have a look at acetaldehyde. Now, acetaldehyde is commonly described as green apple flavour. So what I have is some tart apple food flavouring. I've used this before to try this, and it has been fairly successful, so let's see how it goes. Okay, so let's try this faked acetaldehyde. I've gone with half a ml in just over 100 ml of beer. I topped this back up because it was, well, just very, very detectable. It's still there at quite a strong note. It smells more like apple boiled sweets. The Americans will probably call it Jolly Ranchers, but boiled sweets are supposed to be apple flavour. It's much more present in the aroma. It's close to acetaldehyde in beer. On the flavour it is actually lighter, but close to the experience I normally get for acetaldehyde in beer. But I suspect it's probably better to go along to your homebrew club and wait till someone brings a badly fermented beer along with a load of acetaldehyde in it and someone points it out. It's okay, reasonably close, but yeah, the real stuff is a better way of tasting it. And now on to the last off flavour, and here we're going a bit silly. Once again, we're trying to fake what the description of the flavour is rather than the actual off flavour itself, the actual chemical. In this case, we're going for DMS. Now, DMS is often described as cooked or canned or creamed corn. So, I have a can of creamed corn. Let's give this a go. Well, this one adds up to one of the weirdest things I've done in the name of beer, pushing creamed corn through a sieve. Yeah, so what we end up with, it looks a bit like a lumpy Nipah once I stir it into a beer sample. I've only put it into a little bit because this is a silly idea. Now, the aroma, interestingly, that does have some reminiscences to DMS in beer. There is a sort of corny vegetable note to it, unsurprisingly. It does look really unpleasant. Once again, the flavour is almost there, it's in the right ballpark for the off flavour, but if I had a beer sample that looked like that in the competition, it would be losing for other reasons rather than having DMS in it. Yeah. Well, that's enough of that beer. That's all the off flavours I have for today. I hope that was useful. I'll give you some ideas, some ways to try the off flavours yourself without splashing out on a complicated and expensive kit, and will help you, in the end, make better beer. That's it for today. Goodbye, and I will see you in another video.